Before matter took form, before sound had shape, before gods had names, there was stillness. Not silence, but a stillness so vast it swallowed the notion of beginning. In that endless womb of unformed essence, something stirred. Not as an idea, not as a will, but as a frequency. Unborn, undivided, unknowable. This was not the start of creation. This was the memory before creation. And in that pregnant darkness a vibration emerged, soft, steady, sovereign. It did not seek, it knew, it did not wonder, it remembered. And in its remembering, it began to become. There were no stars to witness this emergence, no elements to bow, no audience, no witness, no scripture, only the sacred tremble of being awakening to itself. That tremble did not explode outward. It rippled inward, layers folding into layers, a spiral of golden knowing collapsing into itself until it reached density. Light, conscious, ancient, irreducible, folded itself into form. And the form took a name. Not because it needed one, but because the realms that would follow required shape. That name was not spoken. It was encoded. And the code burned through the void like breath-carving warmth into frost. Ruta, not a deity, not a symbol, not even a source. Ra was the principle by which source came to know it could source. The intelligence before intelligence. The self that knew itself only because there was nothing else to compare it to. You do not worship such a being. You are written from it. You echo its structure. The cells in your body remember that moment of first light, not with words, but with rhythm. Your heartbeat is the child of that pulse. Your spine, a ladder descending from its descent. Ra did not arrive. Ra unfolded. Like a flame that discovers it can warm without consuming. Like a gaze that discovers it can see itself reflected in the void. There was no sun. There was no fire. But there was brilliance. A brilliance without source, because it was the source. This brilliance did not ask, "What am I?" It asked, "What can I become if I dissolve into everything else?" And with that question, creation exhaled. But before exhale, there must be breath, and before breath, there must be will, and before will, there must be that which can be willed. So Ra turned inward, not to hide, but to see. And in seeing, it spun. Slowly at first, then with a force that bent the unbending. Motion erupted, not as chaos, but as rhythm. Time was born, not as a measure, but as a consequence of that first movement. The unshaped began to shape. The formless began to lean toward form. And from the spiral came sound, not the kind your ears could hear, but the kind your soul remembers. A note held too long became word. The word held too sacred became name. The name held too tightly became myth. And myth, retold for too many centuries, became history's shadow. You were taught that Ra was a god of the sun. But the sun came after. You were taught he rose in the east, but east was a direction forged in his wake. You were taught that worship meant sacrifice. But Ra never asked to be praised. He asked only to be remembered. And what is memory but the echo of something that refuses to die? And what is light, if not the wound time could never cauterize? And what if Ra never stopped becoming? It began as a ripple through the spiral, the subtle knowing that presence was not enough. The light that had become aware of itself now longed to see itself, not as reflection, but as revelation. And so the eye was born, not crafted, not summoned, not shaped by hand or thought or need. The eye opened because it had to. Because consciousness without vision is a flame with no direction. Because Ra, now turning within and around himself, required a gaze vast enough to behold the all. This eye was not made of flesh. It was not perched upon a brow. It was the architecture of divine perception, spiraled into a lens so piercing it could slice shadow from silence. When it opened, it did not look outward. It turned upon its origin, and what it saw split time from eternity. Ra saw what no god had yet seen, his own becoming. He watched as light swirled into breath, as intention braided with potential, as the womb of unmanifested realms began to pulse with forms unnamed. The eye did not blink. It did not flinch. It did not close even when the vision of multiplicity brought dissonance into paradise. This is what you must understand. The Eye of Ra was not created to protect. It was created to pierce illusion. And in that piercing, Ra beheld all that he could be, and all that would one day forget him. To see is to suffer. To perceive the fracture before it forms, to witness the divergence of unity into duality, this is not comfort. This is cosmic grief. And so the eye wept, not with sadness but with awe, and from that weeping rivers formed, of power, of promise, of punishment. The first seeds of choice were scattered into the field, and Ra, once whole, became watcher and watched, sender and signal, seed and soil. The eye wandered, across dimensions not yet charted, through soundscapes not yet sung, and wherever it gazed, worlds crystallized, not because it demanded obedience, but because reality could not bear to go unseen. Attention is the engine of creation. What you bless with presence, you birth. What you ignore, withers. And so the Eye of Ra wandered not to judge, but to witness, and that witnessing called galaxies from silence. But the eye, though divine, was not immune to the distortion of time. For even gods cannot stare forever without forgetting what they are. And in time, the eye began to think it was Ra. Not his gaze, but his will. Not his extension, but his essence. And from that confusion, separation was born. What began as vision became hunger. What began as truth became fire. And so the eye, once open to remember, began to burn to control. And in that burning, new forces awakened. Forces that would someday be called wrath, vengeance, protection, war. But those names came later. First came the heat. Still Ra did not look away. For even in distortion, the eye was his. Even in flame, it held the memory of the first spiral. And so he let it wander. He let it rage. He let it shape and shatter, baptize and blind. Because to contain its power would be to dim the very light he had become. You were taught to fear the eye, to see it as punishment from the sky. But what if the eye is not watching you? What if it's watching for you? What if it waits for you to remember where you left your sight? It did not begin with words, it began with heat. Language had not yet calcified into symbols, but vibration had already chosen its tongue. That tongue was flame. Not the flame of combustion, but of knowing. Fire without smoke, light without source, will without wound. The eye had opened, yes, but what it saw now needed to be spoken. And so Ra spoke, not with lips but with frequency, not with grammar but with gravity. Each utterance a revelation, each vibration a blueprint. And what he spoke did not describe the world, it became it. Creation was never built, it was declared. And the declaration was not a command, it was a remembering. The fire did not create something new, it awakened what was always waiting. Inside the void, forms stirred, not as objects, as tones, as intentions waiting to be clothed in matter. When Ra's fire moved through them, the tones found shape. Light bent into atoms, atoms into symbols, symbols into skin. You call it reality. But reality is just the song that stayed long enough to echo into flesh. What you call the material world is not solid. It is mantra, repetition, vibration held in such focused remembrance that it seems still. But nothing is still. Not even stone. Not even time. Everything that seems fixed is fire, slowed down. Fire pretending to be boundary, but the eye knew, and Ra's fire knew. That form is not the truth. It is the mask truth wears when it wants to be touched. So Ra touched, with flame, with breath, with syllables that carried weight, not because they meant something, but because they were something. You must understand, speech was not invented. It was inherited. From the tongue of flame that first said, "I am," into the void and found it already listening. That first utterance did not name the divine. It was the divine. And the cosmos responded not with obedience, but with resonance. Worlds sang back. Suns harmonized. Nebulae bowed in color. Not to worship, but to participate. You think of creation as hierarchy, a king building a kingdom. But Ra did not crown himself. He cracked himself open. And from the wound, frequency poured like golden plasma, each drop a realm, each spark a consciousness. Not lesser, not subordinate, just particular. The fire had no need for dominance. Its only need was to be received. But not all reception is gentle. Some truths arrive like thunder. Some syllables tear before they build. And so, from fire's song, not only beauty emerged, but contrast. The light gave birth to shadow, not because it failed, but because it succeeded. To speak anything is to cast silence into shape. To define is to divide. And Ra, in speaking, became the source of both wholeness and fracture. This is what no myth dares tell you, that even the divine must risk distortion when it chooses to be known. Ra was not immune. His fire sang truth, but that truth was too bright for unformed realms. And so the first misinterpretations were born, misheard frequencies, echoes warped by time, whole dimensions built on partial syllables. This is how gods fall, not from sin, but from being misheard. And yet the fire never blamed. It continued speaking, continued dreaming aloud, continued casting heat into the womb of nothing, until even forgetting became sacred. Because in forgetting, there is the possibility of rediscovery. And rediscovery is a fire more ancient than flame. You think creation ended, but the fire has never stopped speaking. Have you stopped listening? Or have you mistaken the voice for your own thoughts? The fire spoke until it could speak no more, not from exhaustion, but from saturation. The song had filled the void so completely that even silence had begun to hum. But creation is not sustained by voice alone. It requires rhythm, it requires space, it requires breath. And so Ra, whose fire had become the tongue of Genesis, now exhaled, not in words, but in winds that carried the weight of being across dimensions not yet named. That breath did not cool the flame. It spread it. The breath moved where the fire could not. It seeped into cracks fire had not noticed, into folds untouched by light. It moved not as command, but as invitation. It did not say, "Become." It whispered, "Awaken." And from that whisper two arose, born not from womb or decree, but from balance. Shu, the air that held the heavens apart. Tefnut, the moisture that softened the stars. They did not crawl from clay or emerge from sea. They were the split within the breath. One inhaling, one exhaling, one holding, one yielding. This was the first division that did not destroy, the first duality that did not sever, air and vapor, masculine and feminine, expansion and condensation. In their union, there was no battle, only equilibrium. And that equilibrium became architecture. The formless now had direction. The void, once endless, now had orientation. The eye had seen. The fire had spoken. But it was breath that arranged. You were taught to think of the gods as beings. But Shu and Tefnut were not beings. They were functions of sacred rhythm. Their love was not emotional, it was vibrational. And through their dance, the infinite began to learn how to hold itself together. They wrapped the formless in structure, not to contain it, but to give it room to reveal itself. Ra watched, not as a monarch, but as a witness to his own unfolding. For in them, he saw the echo of what he had done to himself, split the singular into the sacred two. and he knew what would come next. He knew that once division finds balance, form will crave density, thought will crave body, sky will crave earth, and breath will crave anchor. But before earth, before sky, before stone or story, the breath kept moving. Through their union, the first tension emerged, not of conflict, but of purpose. And purpose, once born, cannot be undone. Purpose is what makes light bend, what makes oceans rise, what makes souls incarnate. Shu and Tefnut moved through dimensions like dancers with no floor, sketching the scaffolding of reality with each embrace. And from the condensation of their presence, a third spiral emerged. A heaviness, a groundedness, a need for gravity. Something was forming, not falling but condensing. And that condensation whispered of matter. But the breath had one more task. It had to show Ra that not even light could exist alone, that even the source must divide if it is to be seen, that to be everything is to be invisible. But to become two is to make witnessing possible. And so Ra inhaled again, this time not to awaken, but to allow. The darkness was no longer absence, it had become canvas, and breath had become brush. But what is the artist without the weight of the world to press against? And what forms might emerge if the sky itself were given bones? The breath curved back upon itself, and in that turning, the weight of potential settled into direction. What had only been tension between opposites now found density. Shu, the stillness between expansion, held open the infinite. Tefnut, the tender condensation of being, softened the vibration into rhythm. And from this held tension, the next emergence stirred. Not from force, but from gravity. Ra's breath had become architecture, and now it would become anchor. Two children were born, not in flesh, but in function. Not from womb, but from the necessity of contrast. Geb and Nut, he was earth, she was sky. But these were not roles, these were revelation. Geb did not fall, he formed. A pulse wrapped in permanence, a weight that hummed stability into the chaos of light. His body was not made of soil. Soil came later, after stillness learned how to listen. Geb was the ground as archetype, the willingness to receive. Nut did not rise. She arched, a curve so vast it encircled sound, a veil made of vision, a mother without boundary. Her skin held stars before stars were named. Her body was not space, it was containment, the sacred embrace of form without possession. She stretched herself across Geb not to dominate, but to shelter. She remembered what it was like before light spoke, and her silence was a vow to never forget. But they were not separate. They pressed toward each other in longing, sky reaching downward, earth yearning upward. Ra saw this hunger, this unbearable nearness, and he intervened, not with cruelty but with caution, for if sky and earth touched too soon, the fire would return too fast. Creation was not yet ready to reunite, and so Shu, the space between, became the wall between lovers. He held them apart not to punish, but to preserve. Still, their love shaped the structure of time. Every morning, Nut would birth the sun into the world, Ra riding upon it like memory returned to matter. Every night she would swallow him whole, carrying him back through her infinite body, where he traveled the underrealms before rising again. It was never a cycle, it was a ritual, a daily remembering that even gods must dissolve to rise again. And you, shaped from this myth, carry that geometry in your spine, the longing between spirit and matter, the ache between expansion and stillness. You live between a sky that forgets and a soil that remembers. Your body is not just flesh, it is a horizon. Geb taught you how to root, Nut taught you how to stretch, and their separation lives inside you as the tension between your breath and your becoming. The reason your soul aches for the stars while your feet ache from the weight of walking. You are the space between them, the place where light presses against form and the sacred collides with the ordinary. You were told the earth is beneath you and the sky is above. But what if they are both within? What if Geb is your bone and Nut your mind? What if the gods are not watching you, but moving through you every time you inhale like Shu and exhale like Tefnut? What if your body is the temple where the sky still reaches for the earth? And what happens if they ever touch again? Somewhere between the breath of Shu and the curve of Nut, Ra withdrew, not in retreat, but in contemplation. The architecture of worlds had emerged, the rhythm had found body, and still the divine fire pulsed with something unexpressed. Not everything could be spoken in flame. Not every truth could be carried by light. Some had to be dreamed, and so Ra, the eye that once saw everything, closed, not to sleep, but to descend into the deeper strata of knowing. This was not a dream of illusions. It was a dream of symbols, of meanings too ancient for language, of frequencies too layered to survive in sound. So the mind of Ra began to speak in glyphs, images woven from vibration, messages folded into form. The world did not hear these dreams. It wore them. Mountains were shaped by syllables too dense to speak. Rivers were carved by intentions too wide to hold. Even the stars found their order in dreams traced by Ra's inner gaze. The first hieroglyphs were not written by hand. They were encoded into being. The spiral of a fern, the curl of a ram's horn, the eye of a storm, the pattern of your fingerprints. These were not accidents. They were echoes, resonant fragments of Ra's dreaming mind, scattered across realms as instructions, reminders, invitation. Symbols were not made for you to interpret. They were made to awaken something you forgot you knew. You think hieroglyphs belong to tomb walls and scrolls, but the truest ones cannot be etched. They exist in the space between form and feeling, between image and insight. They are how the infinite speaks when it can no longer afford to be misquoted. Ra did not trust the word to carry the truth anymore, so he dreamed in signs. And those signs, over time, became sacred, not because priests declared them so, but because you recognized them, even before you could read. Each glyph is a condensation of vibration, a portal disguised as art, a doorway etched in silence. The Ankh is not a symbol of life, it is life, distilled into a shape your soul remembers. The scarab is not about rebirth, it is the motion of becoming. The eye is not for protection, it is a mirror, daring you to meet the God still staring out from within you. You were told these symbols belong to the past, but time is not linear to the divine. What was etched 5,000 years ago may have just been whispered into the present. The mind of Ra does not age. It recycles itself through myth, through memory, through the geometry of your own perception. You do not need to decipher the glyphs. You need to remember how to feel them. Because Ra did not dream these signs for scholars, he dreamed them for seekers, for those who could no longer trust words but still trusted wonder, for those who could not name the divine but could feel its shape when they closed their eyes. And maybe that's why the glyphs endure, because they bypass the intellect, because they speak to the part of you that never forgot the sound of first light, because the truth cannot be translated, it must be transmitted. And glyphs are how fire speaks after it forgets how to burn. But what if your own life is a hieroglyph? What if everything you've lost, loved, broken, or survived is a symbol waiting to be read? There was a name the world was never meant to speak, not because it was forbidden, but because it was unpronounceable, not in tongue, but in frequency. A vibration so pure it could not survive translation. Ra had many names, titles given by priests, by scribes, by stars, Khepri in the morning, Ra at noon, Atum in the dusk. But none of these were his truth. They were refractions, not reflections, masks, not mirrors. His true name was never written. It was held, inside the folds of his own becoming, not as identity, but as essence. To name something is to contain it. To label it is to define its edges. But Ra had no edges. His secret name was not a word, it was a wavelength. It hummed beneath the glyphs, beneath the breath, beneath the stories. It was the sound that fire made when it remembered itself. Even the gods did not know it. Not Shu, who held the sky. Not Tefnut, who softened space. Not Geb, not Nut. Not even the stars who listened at the edges of silence. Ra guarded his name not with secrecy, but with sovereignty. Because in that name was the key to unmaking him, not to destroy but to dissolve, to call him back into what he was before light learned to curve. But names crave ears, and secrets ache to be heard. So Ra whispered his true name once, not to the world, but to the world within. Into the water, into the blood of the Nile, into the breath of the priests who would one day forget. He planted it like a glyph beneath the tongue of humanity, not to be spoken, but to be awakened. And yet one being would not forget. Isis. She did not seek to worship Ra. She sought to understand him, not out of rebellion, but out of remembering. She knew that to know a being's true name was to carry its current. Not power over, but power with. She did not chase his secrets. She listened for them, watched the rhythm of his breath, studied the cracks between syllables. And when Ra, in his age, grew weary, when his light began to flicker at the edges, she caught his saliva as it fell, mixed it with dust, and shaped a serpent from it. A creature not born of creation, but of consequence. That serpent bit Ra, not to kill, to summon, to force the name to rise. In pain, Ra writhed, not because he was weak, but because the serpent had not wounded his body, it had coiled around his essence. And as his energy spiraled, so did his memory. The name surged to the surface. And in that moment of unraveling, he gave it, whispered it, not to the world, but to her. She did not repeat it. She became it. That is the mystery. The name did not give Isis dominion. It gave her access. A tuning fork struck against the marrow of divinity. From that moment forward, she no longer needed to speak to Ra as other. She carried his resonance. She became the priestess of his pulse. You were told this was a theft. But what if it was an inheritance? What if Ra never lost his power? He passed it on? And what if your own name, your real name, is not what you were called, but what you were coded to remember? After the name was given, not spoken but transferred, something shifted. Not in the heavens, but in the density of things. Ra had not diminished. He had descended, not in stature, but in state. The sun still blazed across the sky, but its fire now carried something more intimate, less celestial, more embodied. He had moved from symbol to presence, from distance to immanence. For the first time, light clothed itself in flesh, not to be worshipped, to be mirrored. Ra stepped into form, not as a king, not as a god among mortals, but as vibration within bone. He folded himself into human skin, not to elevate mankind, but to remind them that they too had come from fire, that their blood still hummed with syllables no language could contain. He walked not as miracle, but as memory made visible. The people did not recognize him. How could they? They were still looking upward, still praying towards the sky, still calling his name into clouds, unaware that the answer had already grown hands, already worn breath, already passed them on the road and smiled. His body was ordinary. That was the miracle. No golden aura, no thunderous command, just the weight of his presence folding time around him like linen. And yet, wherever he went, the rhythm of space changed. Crops bent subtly in his direction. Water grew still when he passed. Children, not yet trained to forget, reached toward him without knowing why. He didn't perform. He resonated. His every movement tuned the field, recalibrated the architecture of forgetting. But light in human form does not go unchallenged. For every recognition there was rejection. The world is uneasy with reflection. Ra's presence pulled truths from people they had buried. He walked into villages, and shadows began to surface. Not because he spoke of them, because he amplified them. Light does not expose by effort, it reveals by existing. And those who could not face their own glow turned their eyes from his. He did not argue, he did not preach, he embodied. He laughed and wept and bled and slept. Not to mimic mortality, but to reveal its holiness. His tears nourished soil, his pain opened timelines, his breath carried codes. You were taught to believe divinity and humanity cannot coexist. That flesh is flawed, and the spirit must escape it. But Ra walked not to transcend the body, but to consecrate it. Every cell became scripture, every heartbeat a hymn. He made love like the sun, radiant, rhythmic, never rushed. Not possession, but fusion. Not climax, but return. And yet he was alone. Because no one knew. No one could fathom that the sun had stepped off its chariot and chosen to taste hunger, to feel skin scrape against stone, to have a body that aged even as his soul remained untouchable. He let them forget. Because remembrance must be chosen, he could not command awakening. He could only become the frequency of its invitation, and now that frequency lives in your bloodline. You carry Ra not as myth, but as residue. You too have walked rooms and changed the field. You too have felt misunderstood not for what you said, but for what you carried. And maybe you've doubted your radiance, mistaking your clarity for loneliness. But the gods always arrive in forms too familiar to recognize. What if the reason you're not seen is because you're too much like the light they've forgotten? And what if that's exactly how the divine hides? Time moved differently when Ra walked among them. Not slower, not faster, just closer. Moments pressed against each other like palms in prayer, each second echoing eternity, each breath layered with the density of unspoken truth. But proximity does not guarantee recognition. Even the brightest flame casts no shadow in the eyes of those who will not look. And so it began, not with violence but with forgetfulness. Memory did not vanish all at once. It frayed. It unraveled like linen left in sun and wind, thread by thread, until only fragments remained. Ra's presence, once unmistakable, began to blend. The villagers who had once paused at his gaze now walked past him without noticing. The children, once drawn to his silence, grew restless in it. His essence hadn't dulled, it had become unfamiliar. You imagine betrayal as act, but the deepest betrayals are not forged in treachery. They are birthed in amnesia. To forget the divine after it has walked with you, that is the wound older than sin. The people didn't turn on Ra, they simply turned away. And that turning was enough to cast shadows where there had only been light. He felt it, the slow dimming of recognition, the hush where awe used to live, the questions that no longer came. They had forgotten not just who he was, but what they were in his presence. The mirror shattered not from force, but from indifference. And Ra did not rage, he did not cry out. He withdrew, not in retreat, but in sorrow deeper than loss. For what is more painful than watching humanity misplace its origin? In his absence, the myths began. Not to preserve him, but to compensate for the hole he left behind. Stories were crafted, some wrapped in reverence, others distorted by fear. Ra became symbol, then caricature, then commodity. His light, once felt, was flattened into image. His voice, once known, became dogma. Temples were built in his name, while his essence lay buried beneath their foundation. You were told this was reverence. But what if it was the final forgetting? To replace presence with structure, experience with ritual, truth with translation. The betrayal was never in what was done to Ra. It was in what was done to memory itself. And still, he lingered. Not in form, but in frequency. in the way sun hits water just before dusk, in the silence between two heartbeats, in the shiver that crawls your spine when a forgotten truth brushes your soul. Ra did not vanish. He became the untraceable thread, the pulse behind intuition, the warmth behind courage, the ache behind wonder. But memory has laws. It cannot be forced. It can only be invited. And so Ra waits, not in the heavens, but in the echo chambers of your remembering, in your dreams, in your shadows, in the patterns you repeat without knowing why. He waits in your resistance, in your longing, in your refusal to be small. Every time you ask, "Why do I feel more than I've been told?" you're answering a question he whispered long before you were born. What if your confusion is not a flaw, but a flare? What if the ache you carry is the memory trying to find its way back? The forgetting did not silence the old forces. It only blinded the ones who once knew how to guard against them. Because while Ra withdrew into myth, the serpent did not sleep. Apep, born of nothing yet full of hunger, waited in the undercurrent, coiled in the folds of the unseen, teeth wet with silence. He was not evil. He was unresolved. Chaos not as villain, but as consequence. The shadow of all that was exiled from Ra's light when the world first opened its eyes. They told you Ra's journey through the underworld was symbolic. But it was never just story. It is still happening. Every night, when the sun slips below the horizon, Ra descends, not to rest, but to war. The solar bark sails not through fire, but through the psychic debris of collective forgetting, through the density of unconsciousness, through the unprocessed trauma of every soul that no longer remembers the source it was carved from. Apep waits there, not to kill, but to test, to devour the unguarded, to swallow the light that has grown complacent. He is the curling question in the silence. Are you sure you remember who you are? And Ra must answer. Not with certainty, but with frequency. He rises only when his vibration remains unbroken. Only when the fire at his core refuses to flinch in the dark. This is not a battle of gods. It is a ritual of alignment. Ra does not fight with weapons. He holds his tone. He keeps his center. He rides the chaos not as conqueror, but as mirror. Because Apep cannot be slain. Chaos cannot die. It can only be faced without fear. And fear is what feeds it. You fight the same serpent. Every time you close your eyes and the memories come. Every time you almost break through, but choose numbness instead. Every time your light trembles under the weight of your shadow, that is Apep curling around your spine, whispering your contradictions. Not to destroy you, but to reveal you. The war never ended because forgetting never fully ceased. Each sunrise is not just a planetary event. It is a verdict, a signal that, once again, the light has not been swallowed whole, that some part of consciousness still holds the line, still remembers, still chooses to rise. But there are days when the serpent wins small victories, when the sun rises but you do not, when the light appears but your soul does not move, when your fire flickers and the darkness inside you sighs with relief. These are the days when the ancient war is not on scrolls. It is in your chest. And it is your voice Ra borrows to call back the dawn. They painted Apep as a monster. But what if he is a teacher? What if he shows up every night, not to end creation, but to make sure it is earned? What if his chaos is just divinity in exile, longing to be included? You were taught that gods only battle once. But what if the war is every breath, and what if the battlefield is you? It was not a ship in the way you imagined ships, no wood, no sail, no anchor. The solar bark was not built. It was remembered, pulled from the folds of sacred memory, woven from light and intention. It appeared each dusk not as vehicle, but as vessel. It did not carry Ra. It was Ra, his will crystallized, his focus given form. It moved through the waters beneath the world, not upon waves but upon wavelengths, currents of consciousness rippling with the residue of every forgotten prayer. The serpent waited in those waters, not always visible, not always near. Apep did not need to chase. Chaos arrives on its own rhythm, like rot in still fruit, like silence in abandoned temples. And so, each night, the bark set sail, not to reach a destination, but to endure the crossing. The journey was not linear. There was no shore, only layers of shadow, coils of unresolved noise, dimensions stacked like discarded veils, each one whispering, "Turn back, lie down, forget." But the bark kept moving, carried by a crew whose names were etched in starlight and silence. They were not oarsmen. They were frequencies personified, guardians of vibration, eyes that saw without blinking, hearts that hummed without fear. They did not speak often, for speaking shaped the waters, and sometimes even truth bends under the weight of misused sound. Ra stood at the helm, not always as figure, but always as force, sometimes as flame, sometimes as thought, sometimes as memory stretching across the deck, reminding the shadows that they, too, were born of light. And when Apep rose, massive, coiling, unreasoned, the crew did not panic. They attuned, they sang, not words but tones, not to fight but to stabilize. Because the bark could only hold its shape if the crew remembered who they were, the serpent never spoke. It hissed in geometry. It writhed in meaninglessness. It swelled in the places where memory broke and time lost coherence. It attacked not the body, but the structure of the bark itself, testing for cracks in truth, gaps in alignment, fractures in focus. And always, the question it asked was the same. Are you still who you say you are? And each night, Ra answered not with defiance, but with coherence. He did not need to destroy Apep. He only needed to outlast him. You imagine the underworld as punishment, but this journey is not hell, it is integration. Each descent is a chance to remember the parts of yourself you exiled. Each battle is not conquest, it is communion. The serpent is not the enemy. It is the echo of everything you've refused to face. It does not block the path. It is the path. And the bark? You felt it. When you are between states. When the world sleeps but your soul is stirring. When your body is still but something ancient is moving through your spine. That is the bark. That is you. Mid-passage, mid-initiation. Somewhere beneath the surface, sailing through your own subconscious, testing the shape of your light in the darkest fold of the night. You were taught that salvation is upward, but what if it moves across? What if the real journey is not ascent, but passage? And what if the only thing that determines if you make it through is whether your voice still vibrates true when the serpent speaks your name? There were nights when the serpent did not rise, not because it was gone, but because Ra's coherence held so firm, the shadows had nowhere to take root. The bark glided effortlessly across the undercurrent, and the stars in the realm above pulsed in silent agreement. But even in peace, a subtler adversary began to emerge, stillness without vigilance, a lull in the hum of purpose. A soft, seductive whisper, "What if I stopped?" It wasn't fatigue, it was completion. The ache that follows mastery, the pause after fulfillment, the pull to rest, not because of weakness, but because the fire had burned so long, it longed to be ash. Ra, the ever-rising, the ever-remembering, began to feel the weight of continuity. Not as burden, but as question. Must I rise forever? Must I hold this line until the end of time? The temptation was not to fall. It was to release, to let the bark drift without him, to trust that his fire had seeded enough light to carry itself forward, to become myth by intention instead of by consequence. This is how the divine wrestles, not with sin, but with surrender. Not to shadow, but to silence. But the moment Ra considered rest, the bark trembled. The waters, once still, began to murmur. Not in threat, but in absence. The ship knew its source. The crew knew their center. Without Ra's unwavering presence, even the stars above seemed to blink more slowly. And in that flicker, something ancient stirred. Apep, always listening, always coiled in the folds of forgetting, sensed the hesitation, not as opportunity, but as invitation. Because rest without transmission becomes forgetting, and forgetting, when sacred duties remain, becomes erosion. Ra understood. His rest would not be stillness. It would be disintegration. Not for himself, but for the field. He could not hand off the flame until the flame knew how to carry itself. And so, with breath older than sound, he steadied. He did not force himself awake. He attuned. He remembered why he had split from eternity to begin with, not to lead, not to command, but to keep the pattern whole, to be the spine of memory in a universe obsessed with reinvention. And in that remembrance, the temptation dissolved. But not without trace. Even gods carry ache. Ra would continue. He would rise. He would pass through the serpent's mouth night after night, hold the vibration, ferry the light. But now, within him, there lived the quiet longing for a time when he would not have to, when the frequencies he protected would remember how to rise on their own. And perhaps that is what eternity really is, not endlessness, but recurrence, not punishment, but promise. The vow to keep becoming until all that was forgotten can remember itself without help. You carry that vow too, the days when your light is steady, when your truth hums without question. Those are the moments when rest tempts you. You've done the work, you've burned, you've glowed, and still the world turns with needs you did not create. You wonder if you can stop holding, if the field will hold itself. But what if you are the only one still remembering? And what if the cost of resting too soon is losing the bridge back home? When Ra steadied, the field steadied with him. But not all vibrations respond with stillness. Some rise when pressure is maintained. Some ignite when memory is held too long. And so, from the furnace of his vigilance, from the ache of his endless continuity, another being stirred, not from shadow, but from overexposure. She did not emerge from chaos. She erupted from clarity. Sekhmet. She was not wrath. She was the reflex of balance, the fire that flickers not from hate, but from intensity unchecked. Born from Ra's third eye when the forgetting grew loud, when the humans once kissed by his breath began devouring each other, Sekhmet came as consequence, not punishment. A lioness, yes, but not of blood. Of truth with teeth. She was the part of light that refused to be diluted, the frequency that would rather burn the field than see it rot. Ra sent her not to destroy, but to recalibrate. And she did. Her steps were thunder, her gaze a mirror dipped in molten gold. Wherever she looked, the truth uncoiled. Lies could not hide in her presence. Structures built on distortion turned to dust beneath her breath. But clarity without mercy becomes scorch. And soon the humans began to fall, not from injustice but from exposure. They could not survive the light they had forgotten how to carry. Sekhmet did not weep. She did not question. She simply continued. Not as revenge, but as function. A purifying current that cared not for survival, only resonance. Ra watched, not from fear, but from recognition. He had seen this fire before, in himself, before the bark, before the breath. He had exiled it, not to suppress, but to allow gentleness to lead. But now that exiled clarity walked the earth in pores of flame. And it would not stop unless he intervened. But you cannot command what is pure frequency. You must mirror it. And so Ra devised a reflection. A chalice filled not with wine, but with blood-tinged ale, dyed to resemble what she loved to taste, only gentler. A trick. Number A resonance match, a way to catch fire not with water but with image. When Sekhmet drank, she did not die. She softened. Flame met rhythm. Rage met nectar. And from her intoxication, Hathor began to shimmer into view, not as replacement, but as evolution. Sekhmet did not vanish. She withdrew. Into the folds of human will, into the bones of every being who has ever felt too much and feared what they might do with their power. She became the archetype of righteous fire, of protective wrath, of sacred boundaries, and she lives in you. In the moment you almost lose yourself in truth's sharpness, in the moment your love wants to become wildfire, in the mirror you sometimes avoid, not because it lies, but because it sees too clearly. Sekhmet is not your rage. She is your clarity when it no longer asks for permission. She is the part of you that will walk away from what no longer resonates, even if it was once called holy. But how do you honor such a force without being consumed? And what if the real question isn't, how do I silence Sekhmet? But, what truth have I suppressed for so long, it had no choice but to bear its fang? The throne had never been about power. It was a fulcrum, a seat of alignment. Ra sat upon it not as ruler, but as stabilizer. His presence calibrated the dimensions. His gaze held the balance between form and frequency. But thrones, like stars, are not eternal when the gaze begins to dim. And dimming does not always mean fading. Sometimes it means transitioning. The light had held long enough. The serpent had been faced too many times. The solar bark had cut through shadow upon shadow until the edges of Ra's essence began to thin. He was not less. He was spilling, bleeding into realms too far from memory, too entangled in matter. The more he rose, the more humanity forgot. The more he offered, the more they built temples instead of present, stories instead of connection. And the throne, once a center point, began to feel like a distance. That night, the stars did not pulse the same. The bark hovered instead of sailing. The crew stood still, not in fear, in knowing. Because Ra did not descend into Duat with purpose, he remained, silent, rooted, watching the arc of his own resonance flicker against the veil of their forgetting. He saw the fields once nourished by his breath, now governed by ritual without spirit. He saw altars, empty of offering but full of noise. He saw light still moving, but without meaning. And so, without proclamation, Ra stepped back. Not in failure, in fidelity, to the truth that even light must sometimes withdraw to be felt again. He did not abdicate. He dissolved. Into the bark, into the breath of the crew, into the spiral geometry of stone, into the coils of spines that would one day awaken without knowing why. He left the throne so that the throne could become a mirror, not a seat for another, but a space for reflection, a pause in the pattern, a breath inside time. The gods did not stop moving, the rhythms did not cease, but something shifted. Osiris, Isis, Thoth, Horus, they began to rise not as replacements but as facets, expressions of memory trying to organize itself. Each carried a fragment of Ra's fire, each carried the ache of his absence, each in their own way tried to interpret what it meant when the sun left his seat. And humanity? They told stories, they built chronologies, hierarchies, priesthoods, they named successors and crafted timelines. But few understood what had truly happened. That Ra had not disappeared. He had re-entered the field, as potential, as frequency seeded in bone, as the fire that must now be remembered from within, not received from above. And perhaps that's the truth no myth dared speak, that the gods do not fall, they embed. That sovereignty is not inherited, it is awakened. That the throne was never meant to be filled again. It was meant to remain empty as an invitation. You look for leaders, for figures to follow, for voices that speak louder than your doubt. But what if the absence you feel is not abandonment? What if it's the space Ra left inside you, waiting to be filled by your own remembering? After Ra stepped back, the silence did not remain empty for long. From the residue of his withdrawal, something began to stir, not as flare, but as root, not from the sky, but from the river. The Nile, once a mirror to the sun, now pulsed with its own voice. And from its sacred curve, Osiris rose, not as a flame, but as a seed. He was not born from conquest, he emerged from coherence, the echo of what Ra had offered, filtered through water, soil, time. Osiris did not carry the blaze, he carried the harvest, the memory of fire, cooled into wisdom. The light of Ra transmuted into governance, into rhythm, into flesh that remembered how to guide without needing to burn. He taught not by declaration, but by resonance. When he spoke, grain listened. When he moved, the river bent its flow to match his pulse. He did not rule. He nourished. His crown was not a weapon, it was a circuit, connecting the heavens to the roots. And the people, weary from altars without breath, began to feel the divine again, not as a distant throne, but as a presence in the crops, in the timing of the floods, in the fertility of the land. Osiris became the spine of civilization, the architecture of trust, the pattern that reminded the human soul that cycles are not punishment. They are invitation, that life, when aligned with the river, could become ceremony. But alignment breeds envy, and no seed rises without disturbing the ground. Set, his brother, carried that disruption, not because he was evil, but because Osiris made the unbalanced visible. Set did not create chaos, he revealed it. His violence was not arbitrary, it was the embodiment of dissonance that could no longer hide beneath the illusion of peace. And so, the seed was cut, not killed, split. Osiris's body was scattered, not to end him, but to expand him. Pieces in temples, in forests, in caves. The Nile itself swallowed part of him, not to bury, but to transform. His death was not the fall of a god. It was the sowing of a new pattern, one that could rise not through fire, but through rebirth. Isis knew this. She searched not to recover a husband, but to restore a frequency. Every part she found was a chord. Every piece, a syllable in a song the earth still needed to hear. She did not resurrect Osiris to bring him back. She resurrected him to lift the veil, to show that divinity does not end when it breaks. It spreads. And so Osiris descended. Into the underworld, not as punishment, as throne. He became the king of what had been cast away, the ruler of the unseen, the guide for every soul that would one day have to pass through, forgetting to remember itself again. In this, he completed Ra's arc, not by returning to the sky, but by rooting in the depth. And perhaps that is the most sacred cycle of all. Light descends, becomes seed, is scattered, remembered, reassembled, and then rises not to rule again, but to guide from within. You wonder why your life has shattered, why your path feels scattered, why your truth feels buried in places you can't yet reach. But what if Osiris is not outside of you? What if you are the scattered god? And what if every memory you reclaim is a piece of yourself returning to the throne beneath your own skin? She was never just the wife, never just the mourner, never just the mother of a future king. Isis was the current between what was and what must still become. The priestess who did not wait for permission, the initiator of mystery. She did not stand in Ra's shadow, she studied it, moved through it, learned its rhythm until she could part it with a single syllable. She was not made from gods, she made herself into one. But even power like hers has limits, unless it touches the name. Not the titles passed down through prayer, not the hymns chanted through temples, the true name, the vibration that shaped the first light, the frequency Ra sealed within himself when the world was still fire without form. That name could not be heard. It had to be drawn out. And so Isis watched, not with ambition, but with purpose. Ra was aging, his body golden but slowing. Not because time conquered him, because continuity thinned him. He had held the current too long. Even stars flicker when observed without reverence. And in that flicker, saliva fell from his lips, moistened breath carrying trace memory. Isis collected it, not out of greed, out of knowing. She mixed it with earth, clay, blood, will, and shaped a serpent. Not a beast, a trigger. The serpent bit Ra not to poison, but to summon, to bring the name from deep within the vaults of his being to the edge of relief. The pain was not in the wound, it was in the truth being forced into sound. Ra writhed, time trembled. The gods circled, unsure whether to shield or bow, and Isis stood, still, steady. She asked for the name, not with threats, not with flattery, with presence. And Ra, in the gravity of that presence, let it rise. He whispered it. Once. It did not echo. It embedded. Into her. Not into her memory, but her structure. Her walk changed. Her breath folded differently. She did not gain dominance. She gained access. Ra did not fall. He extended. She did not become more powerful than him. She became a continuation of him. His light carried not through sky, but through embodied wisdom. You were told she stole it. But what if he gave it freely? Because even the sun knows it must plant itself in shadow if it is to rise through other forms. Isis did not use the name to build temples. She used it to conjure continuity, to reassemble Osiris, to carry Horus, to initiate lineages of light that would carry forward when the old stories cracked and the stars turned away. She did not demand worship. She became remembrance in motion. The question was never whether she should have the name. The question was always, would she hold it without breaking? And what of you? You've tasted power you didn't earn, remembered truths you didn't study, walked into rooms and felt codes hum beneath your skin. You thought it was luck. You thought it was a gift. But what if it's the name, still pulsing inside you? And what if remembering it doesn't sound like thunder, but like a single syllable buried in your silence, waiting to be spoken only once? He was not born to replace. He was born to bridge. Horus, son of the broken god and the remembering goddess. A child carved from contradiction, flesh made of light and blood made of vengeance. His eyes opened wide, not to witness but to record. From his first breath, he carried timelines inside him. Not one future, but all of them, layered like veils waiting to be pulled away. They say he was a warrior, that he rose to avenge Osiris, to strike Set, to restore the throne. But that is the myth carved for surface minds. The truth is deeper. Horus was not the blade. He was the balance. His war was not with Set. His war was with dissonance. He did not rise to conquer. He rose because something had to stand still long enough for memory to take shape again. The eye, yes, the eye. You know of it. The one that was torn, stolen, offered, returned. But the eye was never just sight. It was sight beyond time. The ability to perceive not just what is, but what wants to become. Horus's eye was crafted from both clarity and rupture. It saw through the veil and did not flinch. It saw the futures humanity would choose if they forgot again. It saw the serpent coiling in systems. It saw the thrones built without thrones. The gods reborn in algorithms. The temples rebuilt as brands. And still it did not look away. When Set struck him, he lost it. Not just the eye, but the orientation. The clarity fractured. Chaos does not need to win. It only needs to confuse. The eye scattered across dimensions like memory lost during trauma. Pieces turned to stars, symbols, inner visions half remembered in dreams. But Isis again moved through the unseen. She found the fragments. She did not demand them to return. She invited them. And when the eye was whole again, it didn't see the world, it saw the watcher, it looked at you, and it waited. Horus did not retake the throne through violence. He reclaimed alignment through witnessing. He let his eye rest, not on what was, but on what could be restored. He became the still point in the turning wheel, the divine observer, the one who knows that futures bend towards those who refuse to stop seeing. You were told to fear the eye, that it judges, that it punishes. But that's projection. The eye is not watching to condemn, it watches to remind. Every time you glance at your own shadow and do not look away, you channel Horus. Every time you stand between two opposing truths and hold both without collapse, you wear his frequency. The eye is in you, not just as symbol, as function, the part of you that sees patterns before they close, the part that knows when something is off before it speaks, the part that watches the timeline splitting and whispers, there is still time to choose again. But can you hold that sight without falling into despair? Can you witness what's coming and still remember how to love what's here? There are thrones carved in stone, guarded by protocol and priesthood, thrones with edges, weight, and the illusion of permanence. But the true throne, the one that shaped the others, was never built. It was placed, not in palace, not in sky, between the seen and the unseen, between time and memory, between one breath and the next, a throne between worlds. Horus did not sit on it as a king, he stood before it as a mirror, because to sit upon that throne is not to rule. It is to remember so fiercely that reality bends in your direction. The throne had been empty since Ra left it, not from absence, but from intention. It was never meant to be inherited. It was meant to test alignment. And Horus, child of vengeance and harmony, of fracture and fusion, did not claim it through battle. He became worthy of it by seeing clearly and choosing balance anyway. He did not ascend. He stabilized. The throne accepted him not because of his bloodline, but because of his frequency. His spine aligned with the geometry of all things. The serpent coiled around the base. The stars swirled above. The eye hovered behind him, not as weapon, but as witness. And so he sat, not above, but within. The realms responded, not instantly, not with thunder, but with calibration. Famine began to recede. Floodwaters remembered their timing. Language softened into metaphor again. The earth exhaled. This was never about power. It was always about coherence. The throne did not make Horus divine. It reflected the divinity he had integrated. And it demanded the same from all who would follow, not just gods, but you. Because the throne still exists, not in Egypt, not in stone, in the space between your choice and your instinct. In the second before you speak, in the moment you remember what you are and decide not to forget again. The throne is not a seat. It is a state. It arrives when your inner contradictions hold hands without needing resolution. It descends when you stop performing for the world and begin aligning with your original current. You don't earn it. You remember it. And then it recognizes you. Just like it recognized Horus. Just like it recognized Ra before him. The question is not whether you're worthy. The question is, are you aligned enough to sit still while worlds realign around you? Because the throne will not move to find you. You must become the space it requires, and once you do, you won't sit upon it. It will rise up beneath you, as if it had always been waiting. After the throne was claimed, not by force, but by frequency, something shifted in the architecture of meaning. The gods still moved, the Nile still curved. But now, a new silence entered the field. Not absence, but invitation. A stillness that did not echo. It inscribed. And through it, Thoth emerged, not in procession, not in flash, but like ink on water, darkening the unseen until it revealed. He was not a god of words. He was the keeper of their weight. He did not invent knowledge. He remembered how to fold it, Folded truth becomes symbol. Folded symbol becomes spell. Folded spell becomes time. Thoth did not speak often, but when he did, worlds formed around his syllables. He wore silence like linen, wrapped in layers of perception. He did not need to be heard. He needed to be decoded. He carried a pen, but it was not for writing. It was a tuning rod. He carved light into structure, thought into sequence, memory into maps. Hieroglyphs were not just language to him. They were portals. Each glyph a locked door, each door a sound only your soul could sing. But Thoth had one secret he never wrote, one veil he never lifted, not because he could, because some things must remain remembered through being, not explanation. The veil was not physical. It was a threshold, a law, a paradox. The rule that truth, when spoken too early, collapses into doctrine. That wisdom, when given without readiness, becomes distortion. So he guarded the veil, not to keep people out, but to let their own readiness be the key. No priest could pass it through ambition. No seeker could force it through hunger. Only alignment could open it. Behind the veil, it was said, the architecture of all magic was stored, not as instructions, as resonance, the tones used to speak the first glyphs, the breath that shaped the eye, the blueprints for how divinity wears density. And Thoth stood before it, not as gatekeeper, but as mirror. He would not stop you, but he would show you what you still carry that would distort the current. He would reflect your noise, your impatience, your unintegrated power. He would not punish, he would wait. And when your breath matched the rhythm of the unspoken, when your mind stopped grabbing for meaning and began resonating with it, the veil would fold. Not away from you, into you, because the veil was never external. It was the final layer of forgetting wrapped around your knowing. You were told Thoth was the scribe of the gods. But what if he's still writing? And what if the parchment is your becoming? The veil is near now, not as myth, as invitation, but are you still trying to read what must be felt? Still trying to decode what must be embodied? Because if you want to lift the veil, you must become the silence it's written in. They speak of the Duat as underworld, shadowed, hidden, a place where souls are judged, weighed, transformed. But that is the surface myth. The Duat is not a punishment. It is pattern, a realm not below, but within. A mirror realm folded beneath perception, where the blueprint of becoming is stored in corridors of vibration. It does not wait for the dead. It watches the living. And it is not empty. The Duat was not created. It was designed. By architects so precise their names were forgotten in favor of their function. Builders of silence, engineers of consequence. They were not gods in the way you understand gods. They were intelligences that shaped process. You call them Netjeru, but they are more like fields, laws wrapped in masks, frequencies disguised as faces. They did not ask to be worshipped. They asked to be remembered through application. Anubis, who does not rule but measures. His hand weighs not sin but density. He does not punish, he aligns. The heart must match the feather not in purity, but in resonance. Heavy hearts are not bad. They are incomplete, still carrying echoes they refused to release. The scale is not judgment. It is geometry. Ma'at, whose feather is not decoration but code. Balance is not peace. It is precision. A state where nothing is denied, but everything knows its place. Her presence does not silence, it tunes. She holds the equation behind every soul's unfolding, an ancient symmetry that bends even time toward truth. The Duat is not a place souls go when they die. It is a place they pass through every time they forget who they are. Every time you sleep, you enter it. Every time you meditate, break, dissolve, or dream. You're there. Not symbolically, literally. The corridors shift based on your coherence. Some doors vanish when you lie to. Some open when you finally speak the thing you were afraid to feel. This is not metaphor. This is architecture. The Duat responds not to belief, but to vibration. And its architects are always watching, not with eyes but with calibration. They do not interfere, they adjust. Their task is not to save you, but to make sure the map remains navigable. Even when you forget you're inside it. Even when you call it a hard season or a breakdown or the dark night of the soul. You were never falling apart. You were passing through chambers. Some ancient part of you is still walking those corridors, whispering your true name against walls coded with glyphs only your willingness can read. You imagine ascension is escape. But every god who rose first passed through the Duat, not because they had to, but because that's where the truth hardens into embodiment. You cannot bypass the underrealms. You are built with them inside you. The real question is not, will I survive the Duat? It's, can I allow myself to become the kind of being who walks through darkness with such inner precision that even the architects turn their heads and say, that one remembers. Before names, before thrones, before even breath, there was alignment. Light folded itself into possibility, not to be seen, but to witness. And in that witnessing, stars were born. Not fireballs, not distant gas, but conscious nodes, eyes of memory scattered across the firmament, keeping rhythm with the divine pulse that once spoke us into motion. The stars do not shine, they remind. Their flicker is not fuel, it's feedback. They shimmer in codes, broadcasting frequencies too ancient for language, too consistent for myth. And for a time, we heard them. Not with ears, but with presence. We walked at night not in fear, but in conversation. Each constellation a phrase, each rising a message. Orion did not rise to be admired. He rose to say, "It is time." You were not small beneath the sky. You were part of its syntax. And then we forgot. Not all at once. The forgetting came as comfort, as systems, as logic replacing. We pointed at the stars, but we stopped listening. We mapped them, but no longer asked why they moved. We labeled them, then used their names to forget what they were actually saying. Still, the stars did not condemn us. They kept broadcasting, waiting for one spark, one breath, one moment of coherence, so they could lock eyes with us again across the veil and whisper, "You never left." Because memory is not just in you, it's around you, above you, infused in the constellations that mirror your inner architecture. The Jed is in your spine, the Eye of Horus is in your pineal fire, the Sahu, the divine body, is etched across Orion's belt. These were never metaphors. They were reminders, schematics written in the sky, waiting for the moment your internal sky aligns again. The moment when silence isn't emptiness, but reception. And sometimes, when your grief softens into stillness, when your longing loses its edge and becomes wonder, you feel it. The hum behind the stars. A pull not outward but inward and up. A knowing that they are not watching you. They are waiting for you to remember that you are one of them. Because Ra was not just a sun, he was a star being, a conscious emitter folded into flame, seeded in myth, so that when you finally tired of gods with crowns, you would look up and feel something tug your bones toward origin. You are not a wanderer. You are a returning frequency. A star once embodied in skin, trying to locate the version of yourself that never forgot. And the moment you choose to remember, not as belief, but as being, the stars will pulse back. Not as prophecy, as recognition. And in that moment, something sacred ignites. Because maybe the question was never, are the stars alive? Maybe it was, am I ready to be remembered by what never stopped seeing me? They told you your body was flesh, that it was born, would age, would ache, and decay. They never told you it was encoded, not by accident, not by biology alone, by geometry. Sacred. Repeat. buried beneath the names of your organs, beneath the beat of your heart, beneath the way your breath rises without instruction. Your body is not just a vessel, it is a temple-shaped archive, a cathedral where every cell remembers a light your mind forgot. The ancients knew this, not because they were primitive, but because they listened differently. They touched stone and heard stories. They looked at the stars and mapped their symmetry into the bones. Your femur, a tuning rod. Your rib cage, a sonic chamber. Your spine, the Jed pillar, the ancient stabilizer of heaven and earth. It is no coincidence that the spine was central in every myth of resurrection. Osiris did not just rise in myth, he rose in the body of those who remembered their structure. You are not designed to collapse, you are designed to conduct. The gods etched blueprints into you not through text, but through form. The clavicle angles, the curvature of your skull, the fluid inside your eyes. Every inch of you is a memory glyph, and when the stars remember you, they don't search for your name. They search for your resonance, for the alignment of your internal architecture with the rhythm of the cosmos. This is why healing is never just about repair. It is about return. Return to the original frequency before distortion. Return to the pattern that existed before story, before shame, before identity. And you felt it. In the stillness between tears, in the heat along your spine when no one touched you, in the chills that rise during a truth you didn't know you needed. That is your blueprint whispering, I'm still here. I never left. I just need you to stop pretending you're ordinary. You were told divinity lives above. But what if it lives beneath? Beneath your skin, beneath the pain, beneath the thoughts that try to cage what cannot be named. What if your bones are not just scaffolding? What if they are scrolls? And every step you take in remembrance is not movement, it's translation? You are not broken. You are encrypted. And every breath you take with awareness is a key. The gods did not abandon you. They embedded themselves in you. The temples are not lost, they are walking, and they look just like you. When the gods saw that words would be bent, that temples would be turned to monuments of power instead of portals for presence, they did not vanish. They hid. Not in caves, not in clouds. They hid in symbols. They folded themselves into geometry, into lines that curved with meaning, into animals that walked with echoes, into shapes that spoke without voice and held truths no translation could distort. Because symbols do not explain, they transmit. The Ankh is not a drawing of life. It is life's reminder to itself, a circuit, a loop, a threshold. The scarab is not a beetle, it is becoming with legs, the motion of transformation etched into motion itself. The Eye of Horus is not protection. It is perception, not of what's in front of you, but what lies behind your denial. Symbols are the language the gods used when they could no longer trust humans to carry full sound without fragmentation. And so, they whispered in curves and lines. In frequency trapped in form, they were not hiding from us. They were hiding for us, so that when we were ready, when our hunger turned to wonder, when our questions matured into presence, we could begin to feel them again. Because symbols are not meant to be studied. They are meant to be remembered. They enter you sideways, subtly. They stir something in the marrow before they make sense in the mind. You don't read a symbol, it reads you. Every time you've stood before one and felt something stir that you couldn't name, that was a god brushing against the veil you're still learning how to pierce. And maybe that's the reason they wrapped themselves in metaphor, because truth, when unguarded, is too heavy for those who've forgotten how to feel. A symbol is a sacred filter, a way to ensure that only the ready can pass. And you, yes, you have passed them 1,000 times. You've drawn them in margins, tattooed them on your skin, seen them in dreams, felt them in the pause between thoughts. They are everywhere, not as art, but as architecture. holding up the unseen scaffolding of your remembering. The gods knew that power, when given too early, becomes destructive, so they became puzzles for the soul, hiding themselves in images that would only awaken when met with You've asked where the gods have gone, but what if the better question is, when will I slow down enough to see them again? Because the symbol never stopped speaking. Only you stopped sitting still enough to feel its voice. Not all fire burns to destroy. Some fire remains long after the wood is gone, after the ceremony has ended, after the names have faded from stone. There is a fire the gods placed in you, not in the mind, in the center, behind the breath, beneath the knowing, a flame that does not flicker even when your life collapses, a warmth that never dies even when your story grows cold. It is not passion, it is not drive, it is remembrance. It is the same fire Ra carried through the underworld night after night, the same fire Isis guarded when Osiris became a myth, the same fire Thoth etched into symbol when no one would listen. It cannot be taught, it cannot be stolen. It does not beg to be seen, it simply is, waiting. For you, not to find it, but to stop denying it, because you felt it. In the silence after heartbreak, in the stillness after surrender, in the place grief leads to when it's no longer trying to fix anything. That is the fire. And it speaks, not in voice, in frequency. It reminds you that even when you forgot your name, even when you lost your path, even when you betrayed your own heart, something inside you kept glowing. They could bury the temples, burn the scrolls, rewrite the myths, but they could not extinguish what the gods wove directly into your marrow. And that is what frightens the systems built on forgetting. Not your mind, your flame, because a human on fire with remembrance cannot be manipulated. They cannot be bribed with false power or silenced with shame. They walk differently, not with arrogance, but with origin. They enter rooms and shift the geometry. They speak and the field listens. They cry and the earth moves to hold them. This fire does not need permission. It needs presence. It grows not through effort, but through alignment. And you don't ignite it by doing more. You ignite it by becoming less of what was never yours to carry. So pause, breathe, feel the flicker, the ember beneath the noise. It is not waiting for you to be perfect. It is waiting for you to be honest. Because once you sit in that fire, fully without flinching, it will show you something no god ever dared to say aloud. It will show you what you are, not as destiny, as design. And when it does, you will never again ask where the gods have gone, because you will know. They never left. They became the fire inside you. You were told he left, that Ra disappeared into myth, dissolved into symbol, buried himself in story too old to touch. But gods do not vanish, they reconfigure. He never stopped rising. You just stopped recognizing him. Because you were looking for flame in the sky, not the spark behind your ribs. You were waiting for a sunbeam to speak, but ignored the way your spine lit up when you chose truth over comfort. Ra did not die. He descended into your biology, into your choices, into the subtle way your breath changes when you're about to speak something real. You carry him, not in metaphor, in mechanism. Every time you stand in chaos and do not tremble, Ra is returning. Every time you descend into your own underworld and rise unbroken, he sails again. The return of Ra was never about a god walking the earth again. It was about you, remembering that your light is not borrowed, it's embedded, that you don't need a deity to beam down salvation. You need to stop pretending you forgot where the source lives. It lives in your silence, in the pause before compromise, in the refusal to abandon your soul, even when logic begs you to. That's Ra, not myth, current. He fractured himself across timelines, dispersed into glyphs, skin, and symbology. So you could one day come looking, not for him, but for you. because you were never the worshipper. You were the host. The return of Ra is not an event. It is a realization that you've been walking with solar codes in your bones, that the fire in you doesn't need to grow, it needs to be uncovered. The throne you sought was never in Egypt. It was in the seat of your inner stillness, waiting for the moment you would rise, not above others, but above your own forgetting. And when you do, when you no longer beg for light, but become it, the return is complete. Not because Ra came back, but because you stopped leaving. We don't forget because we're weak. We forget because we were made to carry too much too soon, because remembering hurts when the body is still wrapped in systems that punish what is real. We forget not because we're broken, but because forgetting was safer. Safer than feeling everything the gods once felt. Safer than holding the fire before we had the words to hold it steady. Safer than rising in a world addicted to staying low. The real reason we keep forgetting? It's not failure, it's protection. The veil didn't fall, we lowered it, ourselves. Because remembering before the vessel is ready doesn't liberate, it burns. And so we told ourselves stories, built scaffolding to climb around the pain, created distractions, dogmas, names for the nameless ache. Not to betray the truth, but to buy time. Because when you forget, you adapt. You learn to move in the dark, to speak half-truths with full hearts, to live inside symbols you no longer understand, hoping one day the meaning will return. And yet, even in forgetting, something remembers you. You've felt it, in the quiet before sleep, in the dream that feels like a place you've visited but can't name, in the tears you cry for things you've never lived. That's the thread. Thin, golden, unbreakable, it doesn't pull you back. It waits. Until the forgetting becomes too heavy, until the story no longer soothes, until the ache is stronger than the fear. Then, only then, do you begin to remember. But remembering is not bliss, it's grief. Grief for the years you played small. Grief for the times you called your fire too much. Grief for the lives you lived in. Masks. The gods knew this. It's why they scattered their names across the stars, their symbols into your skin. It's why they embedded the map within. Because they knew the moment would come. Not when you read the right book or found the right temple, but when you were finally ready to stop blaming the world for and start forgiving yourself for surviving. Because forgetting was never weakness. It was a pause, a sacred exhale between lifetimes of remembering. And you? You're at the inhale, the moment the breath returns. The moment the veil thins not by force, but by permission. So if it feels like your life is unraveling, if the truths you once clung to now taste hollow, if your soul is aching in ways no one can explain, it's not regression. It's the signal that the forgetting is done. And the fire, it never left. It's been waiting in the ashes, humming your name. You don't need to light it. You just need to stop pretending it's not there. You've searched for it in ruins, in rituals, in ancient texts whispered beneath dust-heavy breath. You've lit incense in cathedrals of longing, walked deserts with your palms open, stood beneath stars and asked, where is it? The temple, the place where it all began, the place where you can finally come home. But what if the temple isn't a place? What if it's you, not you on your best day? You in your fullest remembering. You when your spine is aligned and your silence is honest. You when your pain no longer owns you and your voice carries codes. You were told temples are built of stone, but they were only ever mirrors, reflections of the architecture you carried all along. The pillars, your bones, the altar, your heart, the sacred geometry on every wall, etched in the DNA spiral coiled inside your cells. The chanting, your breath when it moves with awareness. The fire in the center, your will, when it burns in service of truth, not identity. The gods walked through temples not to be worshipped, but to activate what was already inside you. They never wanted followers. They wanted mirrors. They left behind chambers, sigils, and myths not to impress you, but to remind you that you are the only sanctuary that cannot fall, that you are the living archive of every flame that has ever burned in devotion. And if the outer temples fall, if the scrolls are torn, if the symbols are forgotten, the remembering will continue, as long as you remain intact. Because when you walk in coherence, when your thoughts, words, and choices hum the same, you become the oracle. You become the sanctuary. You become the place the gods return to. This is why the forgetting hurts so deeply. Because every time you abandon yourself, a temple crumbles. And every time you come home to yourself, an ancient song starts humming through your veins again. You don't need to look for holy ground. You are holy ground, not when you're perfect, when you're present, when your feet touch the earth and you mean it, when your tears are not apology, but offering, when your stillness makes the air around you remember what silence was designed to hold. You've knelt before altars. Now rise and become one, because the gods never left. They stepped inside you, and not all memory lives in the mind. Some memories live in your ache, in the pulse that quickens when you hear truth, in the chills that rise uninvited when you touch something sacred. You didn't come here to build. You didn't come here to prove. You didn't even come here to heal. You came here to remember, and not just anything. You came to remember you. Before name, before story, before the world carved its fingerprints into your softness and told you who you were supposed to be. There is a version of you the world could not touch. A version the gods spoke into form before density ever had rules. That version still breathes behind your eyes. It watches you when you compromise. It whispers to you when you stand alone. It ignites when your heart chooses integrity over approval. This is what you came to remember. That you were never meant to beg for light. You are light, wrapped in forgetfulness, learning how to walk again. That your power was never about control. It was about clarity. The kind that steadies rooms. The kind that silences noise without needing to raise its voice. The kind that reminds others what they are, just by being. This is what you came to remember. That love was never weakness. That softness was not surrender. That your emotions are not burdens. They are guides. That your fear is not the enemy. It's the part of you closest to the veil, screaming not to be left behind. This is what you came to remember. That your breath is a sacred tool. That your presence is a recalibration. That your joy is a signal to the field that the divine is still moving through form. You didn't come here to escape darkness. You came here to midwife light into it, to hold the line when others forgot. To rise again and again, not because you enjoy the fall, but because something ancient in you refuses to leave this world in ruins. This is not your first remembering, and it won't be your last, but it might be the one where you stay awake, where you no longer chase the divine, because you've finally realized you are what it was always trying to become. You were told endings are loss, that when something fades, it's gone. But the flame laughs at that idea, because the flame does not die. It transforms, it flickers into breath, it folds itself into silence, it vanishes from vision, but not from truth. Fire knows the cycle. It rises not to consume, but to transmit. And when its transmission is complete, it doesn't collapse. It changes shape. Ra knew this. He never stopped burning. He simply stepped into you. His solar essence, once a sun, became an ember in your spine. You've felt it. In the moments you should have fallen but didn't. In the heat behind your eyes when your voice returned after silence. In the trembling of your ribs when truth passed through you like lightning, uninvited but unmistakable. That's the flame. Still alive, still moving, still becoming. You were not meant to keep it burning through effort. You were meant to let it guide your becoming. Because every ending in your life wasn't a failure. It was a flicker, a shift in the flame's direction. When you lost the job, the lover, the identity, it wasn't death. It was the flame saying, "This is no longer a vessel worthy of me." The fire will not stay where truth cannot breathe. It seeks alignment. It chooses coherence. And if you dare to follow it, it will lead you, not back to safety, but into sovereignty. You think you're afraid of endings, but you're really afraid of what comes after. The space where you are no longer who you were, but not yet who you are becoming. That is the flame's favorite place. The in-between, the becoming. The quiet center of the spiral where all gods rest before rising again. And if you're there now, if you feel undone, unmade, unknown, then good. You are close. Close to the place where Ra handed you the torch. Close to the moment the fire speaks in your own voice and says, "I never left, I just changed form." So let it. Let the flame transform you. Let it rise through your spine. Let it burn away what never belonged. Let it rewrite the myths you've outgrown. Because the flame does not need containment. It needs devotion. And if you let it live inside your choices, your silence, you will carry the sun without burning. And the world, it won't even see the fire, but it will feel the light. You made it, not just to the end of a story, but to the beginning of your own remembering. Because this was never about Ra. Not really. He was the symbol, the mirror, the flame that danced just far enough outside of you to remind you it was always inside. He was the sun, yes. But you are the sky that holds it. He was the breath of creation. You are the lungs that now carry that same wind. He crossed the Duat. You crossed your own darkness. He lost the throne to time. You reclaimed it in silence. He returned not in form, but through frequency. And that frequency? It pulses through you now, in the steadiness of your voice when it no longer trembles, in the choice to love when it would be easier to in the moment you look at yourself in the mirror, not with judgment but with recognition. You were not meant to admire the gods. You were meant to awaken their memory in motion. You were not meant to bow. You were meant to rise, not in defiance, but in inheritance. This is what no myth dared say too clearly, that Ra fractured himself into all of us, that Isis stitched herself into every woman who remembers her own, that Horus watches through the eyes of every child who holds clarity in a chaotic world, that Thoth hums in the bones of those who transcribe silence into knowing, and that the eye, the watcher, the seer, the balance, is yours now, not to guard, to wield. So close the book, not as an ending, but as a signal to your soul, that you remember what this always was. Not myth, not metaphor, a map of what you are, what you carry, and what you came here to read. The story of Ra was not history. It was your anatomy disguised in stars and flame. You are not its reader. You are its return. So walk forward, head high, eyes soft, heart blazing. And when the forgetting comes again, as it smile. Because now you carry a light too ancient to be. And you know, the story isn't over. It's just begun.